Aisha Johnson, working her third shift of the day with a fever burning through her body, finds herself lost in the labyrinthine mansion at 3:45 a.m. Drawn by instinct and desperation to the one room that radiates safety through its absolute power, she slips into the forbidden study. Surrounded by the scent of expensive cigars, old leather, and the grounding musk she's unconsciously associated with control, she curls up in the oversized velvet armchair tucked in the corner and falls into a deep, feverish sleep. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. I have missed you all. Missed all the experiences we've had together. It's been a rough ride, but trust me, we're getting everything back and running. So stick around. I need your support on YouTube now more than ever. Thank you specially for sticking around to this very moment. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now, back to the story. Aisha Johnson had learned to move through the world like smoke, present but unnoticed, essential but invisible. In Seoul, this skill had become survival. Jobs stitched together with subway rides and convenience store coffee, an expired student visa folded in her pocket like a ticking bomb, and 6 months working in Kwon Ji-hoon's estate where silence was currency and eye contact could cost you everything. She had mastered the choreography of invisibility. Polish the banister at dawn, replace the wilting rose in the sitting room, dust the spines of books no one read, never speak unless spoken to, never linger, never, ever enter the third-floor study. But fever doesn't respect rules. It came on during her second shift, a wall of heat that turned the marble hallways into a labyrinth. By 3:47 a.m., Aisha was lost in her own disorientation, following instinct more than memory through corridors that blurred and stretched. The study door stood open, an impossibility, or perhaps a hallucination. She stumbled inside, drawn by something she couldn't name. Old leather, expensive cigars, the grounding scent of absolute control. The velvet armchair in the corner swallowed her small frame. She meant to rest for just a moment, but exhaustion and fever dragged her under instantly. Her last conscious thought was how strange it felt to be surrounded by danger and feel safe. Kwon Ji-hoon returned at 4 a.m. with rain in his hair and blood under his fingernails, metaphorical, but only just. The negotiation had been brutal. His mind was already calculating the next move, the next threat, the next chess piece to sacrifice. He pushed open his study door and froze. His hand went to the gun hidden beneath his jacket, muscle memory faster than thought. But his eyes adjusted to the darkness and saw not an intruder, but a contradiction. His maid curled impossibly small in his chair, one hand pressed to her chest, her face finally unguarded in sleep. 60 seconds of absolute stillness. The most dangerous man in Seoul, paralyzed by vulnerability. She looked peaceful, more than peaceful. She looked like she belonged there in his sanctuary, surrounded by his secrets. No fear creased her brow, no tension held her shoulders. She had walked into the dragon's den and fallen asleep like it was the safest place in the world. Something cracked inside his chest, a sound like ice breaking, like armor splitting, like a door he'd welded shut suddenly opening. Ji-hoon moved silently, shrugging off his cashmere coat. His hands that ended lives, trembled slightly as he draped it over her fevered body. He studied her face, the exhaustion etched beneath her closed eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw even in sleep, the absolute trust that radiated from her stillness. Then he retreated to his bedroom and didn't sleep at all, haunted by the image of one brave, foolish woman who had accidentally shown him what he'd been missing. Someone unafraid of monsters, sleeping soundly in the heart of his darkness. Dawn crept through the study windows like an accusation. Aisha woke to the weight of cashmere across her shoulders and the immediate, crushing realization of what she'd done. The forbidden study. The chair. She'd fallen asleep in his chair. Panic flooded her veins, chasing away the last traces of fever. The coat, expensive beyond measure, still holding traces of rain and that distinctive scent, felt like evidence of a crime. Her mind raced through scenarios, each worse than the last. Immediate termination, deportation, or something far more permanent in a house run by a man they called the Black Dragon. Her hands shook as she folded the coat with meticulous care, smoothing every crease. She would leave it cleaned, pressed, anonymous. Maybe he'd never know it was her. Maybe... Looking for somewhere to put that? She spun, heart hammering, but the hallway was empty. Only shadows and the sensation of being watched. Aisha clutched the coat tighter and hurried toward the staff quarters, unaware that Ji-hoon stood in the alcove she'd just passed, tracking her movements with unreadable eyes. He watched her panic with something uncomfortably close to fascination. She wasn't afraid of punishment. She was afraid of disappointing him. The distinction mattered. He said nothing, did nothing, simply observed as she left the coat outside his bedroom door with a precision that spoke of desperate respect. When she disappeared down the servants' stairs, Ji-hoon picked up the perfectly folded garment, still warm from her hands, and something in his chest tightened painfully. By noon, Mrs. Choi, the estate's head housekeeper, noticed the shift. The master had inquired about the American girl's health, discreetly, of course. He'd arranged for the estate doctor to examine her, citing concerns about flu spreading through staff. But Mrs. Choi had worked for the Kwan family for 30 years. She recognized obsession disguised as protocol. The encounter happened at 2:17 p.m. in the second-floor hallway. Ji-hoon had calculated the timing perfectly, knew exactly when Aisha would be moving between rooms. Their paths crossed as if by accident. She froze, eyes wide with that mix of fear and something else. Gratitude, maybe, or the beginning of understanding. He should have kept walking. Instead, he paused, let their eyes meet and hold. Hers asked 1,000 questions. Did you know? Am I safe? Will you tell? His gave one answer. The nod was barely perceptible, a slight incline of his head that could have been mistaken for anything. But Aisha's shoulders dropped fractionally, her breath releasing in a shaky exhale. She bowed, deeper than necessary, with genuine respect, and continued past him. Ji-hoon stood in the empty hallway long after she'd gone, his control shattered by a simple truth. He'd just made a promise to protect her secret, and in doing so, he'd begun weaving a web that would either save them both or destroy everything he'd built. The unspoken pact was made. Now there was no going back. Ji-hoon had never been a man who left things to chance. Every move calculated, every variable controlled. So when he began working in the library during Aisha's cleaning shift 3 days in a row, it was deliberate architecture disguised as coincidence. He pretended to read contracts, to review financial reports. In truth, he watched her move through the space with a reverence that betrayed something deeper than duty. The way her fingers traced book spines as she dusted, how she paused just for a heartbeat in front of certain titles. Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, Murakami's Kafka on the Shore, and then, unmistakably, James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time. "You've read James Baldwin?" The question cut through the library's silence like a blade. Aisha's hand froze on the shelf, her entire body going still in that prey animal way he'd come to recognize. Slowly, she turned to face him. She swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." That wasn't a reprimand. Ji-hoon set down the tablet he'd been pretending to study. It was a question. Something shifted in her posture. Not quite relaxation, but a cautious opening. "I studied literature before I came here. Baldwin was required reading in my African American literature course." You were a student. Not a question this time, but a confirmation of something he'd already suspected. Intelligence radiated from her like heat. Scholarship student at Northwestern. It fell through when she stopped herself, remembering who she was talking to. Things changed. Ji-hoon stood, moving closer with the predatory grace that made most people flinch. Aisha held her ground, though her knuckles whitened on the feather duster. What were you studying? Comparative literature with a minor in social justice. A spark of defiance entered her voice. I wanted to teach. The words hit him with unexpected force. I wanted to be a teacher once. Her eyes widened, really seeing him for the first time beyond the terrifying reputation. What happened? My father died. I inherited an empire I never asked for. Legacy has a way of crushing dreams. Or just postponing them, Aisha said quietly. Dreams are patient. They stood in the library's golden afternoon light, two people whose lives had been derailed by circumstance, finding unexpected kinship in abandoned aspirations. Ji-hoon knew he should end this conversation, maintain the distance that kept everyone safe. Instead, he asked the question that had been haunting him since he'd watched her sleep. Do you miss home? Aisha's expression flickered with something raw and honest. I miss feeling like I belonged somewhere, like I wasn't constantly bracing for the next disaster. Her eyes met his with startling directness. But Chicago stopped feeling like home long before I left it. Ji-hoon had no response to such naked truth. He simply nodded once and left the library, his mind churning with dangerous thoughts about belonging and sanctuary, and a woman who cleaned his books with the careful hands of someone who understood their value. The next morning, Aisha found her cleaning cart loaded with new volumes. Toni Morrison, Ta-Nehisi Coates, Audre Lorde, all first editions, some signed, worth more than 6 months of her salary. No note, no explanation. But as she carefully shelved each one in the library, she understood the message perfectly. He saw her. Not the maid, not the invisible servant, but the scholar, the dreamer, the woman who'd once believed in the transformative power of words. And for the first time since arriving in Seoul, Aisha felt the dangerous stirring of hope. The rose in Ji-hoon's private sitting room was always fresh. Every 3 days, without fail, the wilting bloom would be replaced by a new one, deep red, perfectly formed, its petals still tight with morning dew. It was a small act of rebellion in a house governed by fear, a splash of living color in a sterile world of marble and silence. Ji-hoon noticed on the 4th week. While his staff operated on strict protocols and written checklists, someone was adding beauty where none had been requested. He checked the household logs. No florist deliveries to that room, which meant someone on staff was bringing them in, purchasing them with their own money, caring enough to maintain this small sanctuary of softness. He knew it was her before he confirmed it. Of course it was her. After that, Ji-hoon began orchestrating his movements with military precision, leaving the estate at 6:42 a.m., exactly when she arrived for her first shift, returning at 11:30 p.m. when she was finishing the second-floor hallways. Never speaking, never acknowledging, but always there, a presence that had become as essential to his routine as breathing. At 3 a.m., he stood on the master balcony overlooking the estate grounds, a ritual he'd maintained for 5 years. 10 minutes of stolen solitude, staring at the city lights that represented the empire caging him. He'd thought he was alone in this nightly vigil. Then he noticed the curtain flutter in the staff quarters' third window. Night after night, the same window, the same presence watching him watch the world. He should have felt invaded. Instead, he felt seen, and the distinction terrified him more than any rival's threat. She knew. He knew she knew. The silence became communion. The tea appeared on his desk at precisely 9 p.m. during his evening review sessions. Perfect temperature, no sugar, the exact shade of amber he preferred. Ji-hoon tested it with the thermometer he kept for his more paranoid moments. 185 degrees Fahrenheit. Exactly. He found Aisha in the hallway 20 minutes later, her cart full of cleaning supplies, her expression carefully neutral. "How did you know?" The question emerged rougher than intended. She didn't pretend confusion. "Sir?" "The tea, that specific temperature, how did you know?" Aisha met his eyes with that quiet courage that had begun to undo him. "I pay attention to what matters to people. You never drink it when it's too hot. You grimace when it's cooled too much. So I tested until I found the right temperature." The simplicity of her answer was devastating. She had studied him, not with ulterior motive or calculated manipulation, but with genuine care. She had noticed what no one else had bothered to see. "No one has paid attention to what matters to me in years." The words escaped before he could stop them, raw and unguarded. Aisha's expression softened with understanding that felt dangerous. Maybe no one was looking for the right things. Ji-hoon's hand trembled against his side, the first visible crack in the armor he'd worn since his father's death. He turned and walked away without another word, leaving Aisha standing in the hallway with her cart and her impossible kindness. In his study, Ji-hoon pressed his palms flat against the desk, breathing like he'd been running. The rose on the side table caught his eye, fresh, red, alive, a reminder that someone saw past the monster to the man who still craved beauty, who still needed tenderness, who had been drowning in isolation until a woman with careful hands started paying attention to what mattered. And God helped them both, but he was falling.
The storm hit Seoul like divine fury, thunder shaking the estate's foundations, rain turning windows into waterfalls. By midnight, the transportation apps showed nothing but cancellations and flooded routes. Aisha was trapped, her shift long ended, her small room across the city impossibly distant. She found herself gravitating toward the library, drawn by lamplight and the illusion of safety. Ji-hoon stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, motionless as a statue, watching the storm tear apart the manicured gardens below. "I grew up in Chicago," Aisha said, the words escaping before caution could stop them. "I love storms." Ji-hoon turned slowly, surprise breaking through his usual mask. She stood in the doorway, soaked from her sprint across the courtyard, her uniform clinging to her frame. She should have been invisible, forgettable. Instead, she looked like truth personified. "Tell me about Chicago." Not an order, an invitation. Aisha moved closer, drawn by the vulnerability she heard beneath his careful tone. "Southside. Small house, big family. My grandmother used to make us sit on the porch during thunderstorms, said God was rearranging the furniture of heaven." A smile ghosted across her lips. "The scholarship to Northwestern, that was supposed to be my escape, my chance to be more than my neighborhood expected." Ji-hoon listened with an intensity that made her feel like every word mattered, like her story was something precious rather than something to be endured. He'd moved closer without realizing it, the rain creating a world that held only them. "My father died in rain like this." His voice was rough, unused to confession. 7 years ago. Assassination disguised as a car accident. I've hated storms ever since." Aisha's heart cracked for the boy forced to become a monster. "Maybe you're not supposed to hate them. Maybe you're supposed to remember." "I remember too much. That's the problem." The rawness in his voice was almost unbearable. "I remember what he said before he left that night. I remember the phone call. I remember standing in rain exactly like this, watching them pull his body from the wreckage." "Or maybe you remember alone," Aisha said softly. "That's different. Memory shared is memory survived." They were sitting now. When had that happened? Close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the subtle cologne that always announced his presence. The rain drummed against glass, creating a percussion that felt like a heartbeat. Ji-hoon's hand moved toward hers, trembling slightly, hovering above her fingers. For one eternal moment, the most dangerous man in Seoul was vulnerable, reaching for connection. Then reality crashed back. He stood abruptly, putting distance between them with mechanical precision. "I'll have a driver. I'll wait out the storm. Aisha's quiet boldness stopped him mid-sentence. If that's allowed. Their eyes met, held. His expression cycled through a dozen emotions before settling on something that looked dangerously close to longing. He nodded once, then walked away, his control hanging by threads. But he stopped in the shadowed doorway, hidden from her view. From there, he watched Aisha curl into the leather chair, watched her fingers trail over the books he'd given her, watched her fall asleep to the sound of rain that no longer felt like grief. And Ji-hoon finally understood. She hadn't just entered his sanctuary that first night. She had become it.
Park Sung-min studied the surveillance photos with the focused intensity of a predator scenting blood. 6 images taken over 2 weeks, all showing the same impossible truth. Kwon Ji-hoon, the untouchable black dragon, watching his maid with an expression that could only be described as captivated. "The black dragon has found a weakness," Park said, sliding the photos across the table to his lieutenants. "Interesting." One photo captured Ji-hoon in the garden at dawn, his entire body angled toward where Aisha watered the roses. Another showed him standing in shadows while she worked, unaware of his presence. The final image was most damning, their silhouettes in the library window, sitting close enough to be intimate. Park smiled like a shark. Find out everything about the American girl, every debt, every vulnerability, every pressure point. When the time comes, she'll be our opening move. Across the city, Min Jun stood in Ji-hoon's private office, his expression grim with loyalty and concern. "Boss, the men are talking. You're spending time with the American Maid." Ji-hoon's voice dropped to sub-zero temperatures. "My time is my business." "Your business is everyone's business when you run an empire." Min Jun held his ground, a privilege earned through 15 years of unwavering service. "They see how you look at her. Worse, our enemies see it too. We've intercepted chatter. The Jade Serpent is watching." The words hit like physical blows. Ji-hoon's jaw clenched, his mind already calculating the threat vectors, the exposure points, the hundreds of ways Aisha could be used against him. "They'll use her against you," Min Jun said quietly. "You know they will." Ji-hoon knew. God, he knew. His feelings had become visible, and in his world, visibility meant vulnerability, meant death. The transformation was immediate and brutal. Ji-hoon increased estate security with military precision, additional cameras, rotating guard shifts, background checks on every vendor. But he also created distance. When Aisha entered rooms, he left them. When their paths crossed, he looked through her as if she were invisible again. Aisha felt the withdrawal like winter descending. The man who had given her books, who had listened to her stories, who had almost touched her hand during the storm, that man vanished, replaced by the cold stranger everyone feared. She told herself she'd imagined the connection, that she'd been foolish to believe a monster could want anything from her beyond service. The poisoning attempt came on Thursday. A cup of tea, perfectly temperature-controlled, sat on Aisha's cleaning cart, meant for Ji-hoon's desk. She reached for it automatically, had it halfway to the study when Ji-hoon materialized in the hallway. His eyes went to the cup. Something in his expression shifted from cold to lethal. "Put it down." The command was absolute. When she obeyed, he took the cup, held it to the light, and his face transformed into something terrifying. Within 30 minutes, Ji-hoon had identified the traitor, a junior associate with gambling debts and Jade Serpent connections. The man died screaming in the estate's basement. Ji-hoon's roar echoed through every corridor. "Anyone who touches her answers to me personally. Spread the word. The American is under my protection. Harm her, threaten her, look at her wrong, and you'll pray for the mercy of a quick death." Aisha stood frozen in the hallway, finally understanding the truth. He hadn't been avoiding her from disinterest. He'd been trying to save her life by making her invisible again. But his protection had just painted the largest target imaginable on her back. Their eyes met across the blood-stained foyer. His were full of fury and fear, and something that looked devastatingly like love. And Aisha realized that caring for Kwon Ji-hoon wasn't just dangerous, it was a death sentence waiting to be executed. Aisha's knuckles rapped against the study door at midnight with a force that surprised even her. Protocol shattered, hierarchy destroyed, fear transformed into something far more dangerous. Determination. "We need to talk." Ji-hoon looked up from his desk, shock rippling across features trained never to reveal emotion. No one demanded his time. No one, especially not the maid who was supposed to be cowering in fear after witnessing his brutality. "Aisha, you can't protect me by pretending I don't exist." She stepped inside, closing the door behind her with deliberate finality. "That's not protection, that's cowardice." His facade cracked like struck glass. "I can't protect you at all. That's the problem." The admission tore from him, raw and desperate. "Don't you understand? Every moment you spend near me, you're in danger." "I'm not asking for protection." Aisha moved closer, her courage a living thing between them. "I'm asking for honesty." Ji-hoon stood abruptly, the chair scraping against hardwood. "Someone tried to kill you because of me, because I was careless, because I let myself—" He stopped, breathing hard. "Careless about what?" The silence stretched taut as a wire. Then, quietly and devastatingly, "About hiding how I feel about you." The words hung in the air like confession and condemnation intertwined. Aisha's heart hammered against her ribs, every instinct screaming that she'd just crossed a line from which there was no return. "You think I don't know?" Her voice emerged steadier than she felt. "You think I haven't felt it too? The way you watch me, the books, the tea, the fact that you covered me with your coat instead of having me thrown out?" "You don't understand what you're saying." Ji-hoon's control was unraveling thread by thread. "What I am, what being near me means. I've killed people, Aisha. I'll kill more. There's blood on these hands that will never wash clean. I understand you're the loneliest man I've ever met. And I understand you saw me sleeping in your chair and covered me with kindness instead of cruelty. That tells me who you are underneath the monster everyone else sees." "I am a monster." His voice broke on the word. "Then be a monster who lets one person see his humanity." Aisha reached up, her hand hovering near his face. "Be that for me." Ji-hoon's control shattered like a dam breaking. He pulled her against him with desperate force, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that tasted of rage and tenderness and years of isolation finally ending. She gasped against his lips, her hands fisting in his shirt as he lifted her onto the desk, scattering papers and precedent and every rule that had kept them separate. The kiss deepened, dangerous and inevitable, two people drowning in connection they'd been denying for months. When he finally pulled away, his forehead pressed against hers, his breathing ragged. "If you stay, you'll be part of this darkness forever. There's no going back from this." Aisha's eyes met his, unflinching. "I've been part of darkness my whole life. Poverty, racism, invisibility. At least yours has honest eyes." Ji-hoon cupped her face with hands that trembled, the black dragon reduced to a man terrified of losing the only light he'd ever known. "I can't lose you." "Then don't push me away." She kissed him again, softer this time, a promise sealed in the darkness. "I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you." And in his forbidden study, surrounded by books and secrets and the weight of impossible choices, Ji-hoon finally surrendered to the most dangerous thing he'd ever possessed: love.
Dawn broke soft and golden over the estate gardens. Aisha had developed a ritual, 30 minutes among the roses before her shift began, stolen peace in a world of carefully maintained violence. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her until the cloth pressed against her mouth, chemical sweet and suffocating. The kidnapping was brutally efficient. 3 men, professional silence, a van with diplomatic plates that the cameras would flag as approved. She was gone in 90 seconds, leaving only crushed rose petals and a fallen gardening shear as evidence. Ji-hoon's security protocols triggered at 6:47 a.m. The cameras showed nothing suspicious, but the AI pattern recognition noted an anomaly. Aisha's phone signal had vanished mid-garden.
He was in the surveillance room within 3 minutes, his face carved from ice and fury. The video message arrived at 7:15 a.m. Aisha sat bound to a chair in an empty warehouse, her lips split, but her eyes blazing with defiance. Park Sung-min's voice purred from off-screen. "Good morning, Black Dragon. I have something that belongs to you. Come alone to the coordinates I'll send, or she dies slowly, very, very slowly." Ji-hun watched the video 3 times, his expression growing colder with each replay. The man who had kissed Aisha with desperate tenderness vanished, replaced by the predator Seoul's underworld had learned to fear. This was the monster his father had forged, clinical, calculating, absolutely merciless. "Mobilize everyone." His voice could have frozen blood. "Min-jun, arm the loyalists. Full tactical gear. I want surveillance on every Jade Serpent property within the hour." Min-jun had served Ji-hun for 15 years and had never seen this expression. Protective fury so intense it became physics-defying cold. "Boss, I've never seen you like this." Ji-hun loaded his weapon with mechanical precision, each movement promising death. "You've never seen what I become for someone I love." In the warehouse, Aisha refused to give Park the satisfaction of fear. She studied her surroundings with the analytical mind that had earned her a scholarship to Northwestern. Exit points, guard rotations, structural weaknesses. When Park approached, circling her like a predator assessing prey, she met his eyes directly. "You needed to take a woman to fight him. That's not strength." Park laughed, genuinely amused. "You have spirit. I can see why he's obsessed. I'm not some damsel to be rescued. Let me go and face him directly if you're so confident in your power." "Oh, you misunderstand." Park crouched to her eye level, his smile sharp as broken glass. "You're braver than half my men. Shame to waste you. But he needs to learn that power means nothing without sacrifice, that caring makes you weak. Or it makes you worth fighting for." Aisha held his gaze. "You're about to find out which." Park's respect grew despite himself. The Black Dragon chose well. Almost makes me regret what's about to happen. Across the city, Ji-hun strapped on body armor with the focus of a man preparing for war. His reflection in the mirror showed something inhuman, a creature of pure protective violence, every civilized layer stripped away to reveal the weapon beneath. He'd killed before out of necessity, strategy, cold calculation, but this was different. This was personal. This was for her. Min-jun watched his boss arm himself with an arsenal that promised apocalypse. "What's the plan?" Ji-hun's smile was the most terrifying thing Min-jun had ever witnessed. "I'm going to show Park Sung-min exactly what happens when you threaten what belongs to me, and then I'm going to burn the Jade Serpent to ash." The Black Dragon was done pretending to be human. For Aisha, he would become the monster everyone feared, and God help anyone standing in his way. Ji-hun's assault on the Jade Serpent stronghold was poetry written in violence, surgical, brutal, unstoppable. His men moved through the warehouse district like shadows with teeth, dismantling Park's defenses with the precision of a maestro conducting death. Inside the central warehouse, Aisha had spent 3 hours working her bonds loose against the chair's rough edge. Her wrists bled, but the rope had finally given. When the guard came to check on her, she was ready. The gardening techniques her grandmother taught her translated surprisingly well to combat: leverage, surprise, the vulnerable points of the human body. The guard went down hard. She was halfway to the exit when gunfire erupted outside. Then the door exploded inward and Ji-hun stood framed in smoke and cordite, his expression promising apocalypse. Their eyes met across the warehouse, her fighting her way to freedom, him fighting his way to her, and something passed between them that transcended words. Pride, terror, recognition that she was no damsel and he was no white knight. They were two survivors who'd chosen each other despite the cost. touching reunion. Park's voice cut through the chaos. He materialized from the shadows, gun pressed to Aisha's temple before Ji-hoon could react. Drop your weapon, dragon, or I paint these walls with her brilliant mind. Ji-hoon's calculations ran cold and fast. Distance, 15 meters. Accuracy. Park was a decent shot. Probability of Aisha surviving if he rushed, 30%. Unacceptable. He dropped his gun, raised his hands, knelt. Park's shock was visible even through his fury. The black dragon kneels for a maid? I kneel for the woman I love, Ji-hoon's voice carried across the warehouse, steady and absolute. That's not weakness, it's priority. My empire means nothing if she's not in it. Park's attention shifted to Ji-hoon for one crucial second, half a heartbeat of disbelief that the legendary Black Dragon would surrender. It was enough. Aisha moved with the muscle memory of a woman who'd survived Chicago's South Side, who'd fought invisibility her entire life. She dropped her weight, twisted hard, and drove her elbow into Park's solar plexus with everything she had. The gun discharged wildly as he stumbled. Ji-hoon was moving before the echo faded. He recovered his weapon in a roll that defied physics, came up firing with the precision of a man who'd trained since childhood to be a perfect instrument of death. Park's men surrendered or died. The choice took seconds. Park himself went down with Ji-hoon's bullet between his eyes. Clinical, efficient, final. The message to Seoul's underworld was clear. Threaten what the Black Dragon loves, and mercy becomes a fairy tale. The warehouse fell silent except for rain hammering the corrugated roof. Ji-hoon crossed to Aisha in 3 strides, his hands frantically checking her for injuries, the split lip, the rope burns, the bruise blooming on her temple. I thought I lost you. His voice broke on the words, the invincible monster reduced to a man trembling with aftermath. I would have burned the entire city, every district, every rival, everything. Aisha cupped his face with bleeding hands, her smile fierce despite the pain. I know, I could feel it. That's how I knew you'd come. They stood in the wreckage, covered in blood and rain and the debris of a war fought for love, and held each other like drowning people finding solid ground. Around them, Ji-hoon's men secured the perimeter, witnessing something unprecedented, their boss vulnerable, shaking, human. The underworld would talk about this for years. The Black Dragon hadn't just won, he demonstrated that his love made him exponentially more dangerous, that a man with something to protect fought with the fury of someone who'd finally found a reason worth dying for and living for.
6 weeks after the warehouse, the estate had transformed in ways too subtle for outsiders to name, but impossible for residents to miss. The oppressive silence remained, but it no longer felt like suffocation. Warmth crept into selective spaces, fresh flowers in the hallways, music drifting from the library, the sound of laughter that no longer triggered fear. Ji-hoon's empire had stabilized with a respect more solid than before. Seoul's underworld had witnessed his protective fury and understood. The Black Dragon with something to lose was exponentially more dangerous than the isolated predator they'd known. Rivals kept their distance. Allies pledged deeper loyalty. Power built on love, it turned out, was unshakable. Aisha's visa situation resolved itself through channels she didn't question. Ji-hoon's political connections working invisibly to transform her from illegal immigrant to legitimate resident with work authorization. She now managed his cultural foundation and the legitimate business fronts that laundered his empire's reputation. Her literature degree finally finding purpose in grant proposals and community programs. Their relationship became Seoul's worst-kept secret, scandalous, dangerous, undeniable. But after what happened to Park Sung-min, no one dared question it aloud. Late afternoon found Aisha in the study, curled in the velvet chair that had started everything. Exhaustion from a foundation meeting had pulled her under, her head tilted at that same uncomfortable angle, one hand pressed to her chest. The scene echoed that first night with startling precision. But this time, Ji-hoon sat across from her in his own chair, reading Murakami, occasionally reaching out to touch her hand, grounding himself in the reality that she was here, safe, his. When her breathing shifted toward waking, he set down his book and simply watched with that same expression from their first encounter. Wonder, tenderness, the look of a man seeing sanctuary personified. Aisha's eyes fluttered open, found him watching, and smiled with the lazy contentment of someone who knew she was cherished. Still finding sanctuary in dangerous places? The most dangerous place became the safest. She stretched like a cat, comfortable in her kingdom. That's the magic of it. Ji-hoon reached for her, pulled her from her chair into his with the possessive tenderness that defined everything between them. She settled against his chest, fitting perfectly into the spaces his armor used to occupy. "You made a monster remember how to be human," he murmured against her hair, breathing in the scent of her, vanilla and resilience and home. "You made an invisible woman remember she deserves to be seen. Fair trade, I'd say." They sat together as dawn broke over Seoul, the study gradually filling with golden light. Books lined the walls, Baldwin and Morrison alongside Korean classics. Silk curtains framed windows that no longer felt like barriers. The grounding scent of expensive cigars mixed with the roses she'd placed on his desk that morning. Two exiles who'd found home in each other. Two people transformed by the radical act of choosing love despite impossible odds. In the fortress on the outskirts of Seoul, silence was still the most expensive luxury. But now it was broken by laughter, by whispered conversations in the dark, by philosophical debates over morning tea, by the sound of a woman who dared to sleep where dragons dwell, and taught the dragon that love was the most dangerous and valuable treasure he'd ever possess. Aisha had fallen asleep exhausted and invisible in a forbidden room, seeking refuge she had no right to claim. She'd woken to find herself seen, cherished, protected by a man the world called monster. And Ji-hoon, the black dragon, the weapon his father had forged from grief and violence, he'd discovered that true power wasn't control or fear or isolation. It was the courage to be vulnerable with one person, to let someone sleep peacefully in your sanctuary, to build a kingdom worth protecting because it held the one soul that made you human. Sometimes love doesn't save you from darkness. Sometimes it simply gives you a reason to transform it into light.